The second project in Advanced Typography, students will be designing a typeface of their own, and that is intended to give you some understanding of how typefaces are put together and some appreciation of the process behind making a typeface, and also give you experience building a set of glyphs or letters that work well together. Let me just throw this into full screen mode. And so my assumption for this is that most of you designing a modular typeface, and I'm going to talk about modular fonts and how those are put together and show you a little bit of an example. But that's not a requirement of the assignment. I have had students take a different route, do a more traditional serif or sans serif typeface, and to some extent all fonts are modular, and we're looking at a modular font right now. Modular Fonts is set in a modular font, and the way you might think about it is it's a typeface that is built together out of a limited number of pieces. So the curve on this L is going to match curves throughout the font. And to some extent, all fonts are modular in that font design software gives you library functions so that if you have serifs or if you have strokes that are the same thickness, you can store them and use them again as you put together characters. I would say modular fonts are just even more so. So this dates back. This is a older modular font, and we'll look at these pieces a little bit more closely in a minute. But you can see up here at the top of the screen the components that were used to make these letters. And these curves match exactly, and then you can see that curve is this curve right here, and that is used and it is flipped to make those two for the top of the A. And then we have this unit that comes in and fills the rest of the A, same unit that's here in the B, and you see them carried out. Now, the modules are not destiny, I would say. DNA is not destiny. These are the DNA of the font, but you can mix it up, as this example of the R on the screen shows. It's the same modules that are used to make all these other letters, but in this case, the little bitty one comes in as a bit of a serif, and extra beams are brought in to make this R extra tall and extra condensed. So even if you're working with modules, you still have to think about whether those letters are working together in a pleasing and readable way. Here's another example of a modular font. And you can see the same sort of ideas with these strokes playing through the font. And another example, if you think of the font DIN on your computer, DIN is very often, I think it's a German word that has to do with type, but so it's not always a modular font, but a lot of DINs are modular, and I think the sans serif DIN that comes with your computer certainly is. Another font that lends itself to modularity is Stencil Fonts. And here's just a couple of examples. These are really kind of variations on the same typeface design. And this is one, I didn't do this particular version of it, but I did, if you go to a website called Brain Droppings, their logo is set in a very similar font to this one. And so I based a typeface on that font, and I used it to actually cut an actual stencil and do some airbrushing with it. And if you go to my Behance page, you can see the results of that along with some other stencil fonts I used. But stencil fonts are also kind of modular, and that's a possibility for this as well. Also digital. Your module can be as simple as a dot or a square or a triangle. It doesn't have to be as elaborate a system as that first one I showed you. And this could also be, well, if the dots were a little bit further apart, it could also be a stencil font, so long as there was enough connective tissue between the dots to put it together. There's you saw a lot of, particularly in the early days of desktop publishing, a lot of pixel fonts, and a square is just a module like any other. And if your square is relatively big, you get a relatively coarse letter. If it's relatively smaller, you can have a relatively finer looking letter. And here's one made with squares and triangles, really just two modules in this case. And this one's a little bit more elaborate, a little bit more old-fashioned, but again, the same sort of basic serifs and with bars, in this case, the squared off corners playing throughout the typeface. And I think that's my last slide. It is, so let's escape out of this. And I'll just show you how some of these pieces might come together in Adobe Illustrator. This is actually, I did this for Off the Wall a couple of years ago. It's very hard to come up with a hands-on project for people who are not graphic designers. And so this was my idea one year, was to put together a modular font, and I put together the sheet with all the modules. And if you look at this, it's very similar, basically the same as the first font on the slide, and one could sort of bring an element down. And I just have a bunch of these stacked up on top of each other. And let me just turn on my smart guides, which will help me line these up. I'm a little bit off the curve, that's okay. And we could bring down, say we were forming a simple O. I want to line up with something above, but you get the idea. And so that's not super neat. I would do that a little bit, or I might make it actually really messy rather than neat if I wanted to. I could have it sort of a broken modular font, but let's keep it somewhat neatish. So that would be a really skinny O, but you could use the same modules to make one that is just a little bit wider if you want it to. And then you could use either the shape builder or the Pathfinder tool to put this together. And I see the Pathfinder, so I'm just going to use that one to fuse this together. And so that would be a way to create, well, oh, I missed one, to create a fairly crude letter O. Let's just snap that all the way together. And one could, I suppose, take this guy, and it could become a Q. So same deal if one was making an M. All this junk up top, smart guides did me absolutely no good at all. In fact, I think I'll just turn them off. So anyway, you get the idea. So what I'll be asking of undergraduates in the class is to make a complete set of letters, and the choice is yours. They could be uppercase or lowercase, and just A to Z, complete set of letters, and also one punctuation mark of your choice, but it can't be a period or a comma. It could be any other punctuation mark, or it could be any of the symbols. It could be an ampersand, or it could be a @ sign or a $sign, just something that isn't a letter. And you'll be putting them together on a board. Well, not on a board. You'll be putting them together on a digital presentation, and with the word in your font, hamburger fonts, set underneath it, and that will all be explained on the assignment sheet. But hamburger fonts is universally used in the type design community when you're pitching a new typeface is those are the letters you design as kind of a proof of concept, because it gives you a bunch of different letters and how they fit together next to other letters. So you get to see a bunch of interactions. And so when a type designer is, say, submitting a typeface to a foundry for possible publication, that is the word they send. They don't have to send every letter of the font. They just have to send the word hamburger fonts, and someone who is an expert on type design can look at that word and say, yes, this can turn into a reasonably good font, or no, this font isn't right for us, or doesn't look like it has promise. So that's the word that's just kind of universally used for that. Now, if you're a graduate student, you're going to be designing both an upper and lowercase of letters, and those have to be, in the same font. The uppercase and the lowercase have to work together. And you'll also be doing one punctuation mark that is not a comma or a period. And in your case, you're going to be putting together the word hamburger fonts twice. Once as a uppercase start and lowercase for the rest of the word, and then once as all caps, so we can see all that interaction together. So I look forward to seeing you later this week, and we will call that done.